Hey, welcome back, you guys and gals, to my programming tutorial for advanced programming using C++. Today we're going to discuss functions. This is lecture 1, and let's get right to it. So, why do we want to use functions? Well, in the previous lectures, in the previous course that we did, if you remember originally, we were building our programs under main. And main can get a little bit messy if you start writing too much code in it. So if you saw last lecture, you had your main, sorry, you had your main function here, right? And then you had a bunch of code here, right? And then you even had your own function calls, such as maybe the math pal function, right? And so on. And there was really no way to modularize your code, at least at the point that we learned or in our first course. So in now what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you some fundamentals of a function, and then we'll learn to apply them into a program. So basically what you want to do is, instead of having a box, right, and having a main function here, and just have that your program enter here and then leave here, what you want to do, and you don't want to take this approach, what you want to do is you want to have a main function, and then from that main function you want to modularize your code where you call individual functions. Now remember, the main function is the main point of entry of your program, which means that regardless of what functions you write, always remember that you're always going to enter main first. That's your first entry point. Once you enter the main, then inside your main you can start calling other functions, and you would be defining these functions yourself, right? So you could have f1, f2, f3, f4. Now please do not name your functions with 2 letters. I am just putting that as an example so that it fits in my little drawing here. So again, this is the concept of divide and conquer. So very important concept to understand. Divide and conquer, right? One of the problems that I like to give is, and we're going to learn how to manipulate files later in these string of lectures, is I want you to read data from a file, then sort it, do some computations on the file, and then write out to a new file in a sorted manner, right? Now, looking at that problem, there's a lot of things going on. Originally, if you didn't know functions, you'd have to do everything inside the main, which it can be done, but it can get a little messy. Now that we're going to learn how to do functions, we can revamp this program, rewrite this program, and actually utilize functions so that we split up the functionality of that program. So that's actually what I'm going to have you do in the upcoming lectures as a kind of real world application. All right, so the first thing I need you to understand is function definition. So we'll stick to our rainbow type writing. Function definition. How do you write a function? Well, let's start with our original function that we had, which is the main, right? So int and then main. Okay. So if we break this apart, this is what we call in a function called a return type. This is the name of your function. And then these 2 parentheses here, they're going to be called your parameter list. Now, there is a deviation or a difference when you're writing a function versus you're calling a function. So when you're writing a function, Whatever goes in these parentheses is called a parameter or parameter list. When you're calling a function, then the terminology for that would be arguments. So what arguments are you going to use? I want to make sure that you understand that, because as we go through this course, I'm going to use more advanced terminology in the language. So again, right now we're calling this a parameter list, and we're going to create a parameter list. But these are basically the fundamental components of a function, right? And you've seen this function before. It's your main function that you've done in previous programs, right? Now the return type here, any return type is allowed. I mean, any data type is allowed. So you have an int, right, in main. You could also have double, right? You could have a char, a bool. Any return type that is a valid primitive return type could be your return type in your function. Now, all these things are not optional. You must have them all. You must have a parameter list. If you don't have any parameters, you can just put empty parentheses, and that's perfectly fine. Okay? So again, the return type defines as to what your function is going to give you back. So if we think of this as a black box, okay, in this case, we're coming in, right, in terms of execution. Our function is called main, right, which is what we're used to. And then what's coming out, there's something going to come out. It's a one value, and then that one value has to have a return type. In this case, the return type is going to be int, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be int. It could be double, char, whatever data type that you want to use. But just in this example, that's what this signifies. What is coming out of this box, right? The box that you're defining. Okay? Now, the name of the function, in this example, we're using main. When you create your own function, you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. All right? Now, in this course, I expect you to follow certain rules. So the function name must be descriptive, and it should not be, one or two letters, or just call it like I did before with F1, F2, F3. Usually, I'd like for you to use lowercase letters for function names. And it's just a part of my rules. I mean, you don't have to follow them to the T. It all depends on where you're at or where you're going to write this for. But I'm just trying to lead you towards good practices, that's all. And then the parameter list is exactly what's coming in when somebody makes your function call. So this is out, this is in, and this is compute, right? So if you remember from my earlier course, the first part of this course, there's 3 steps to an algorithm, right? There's input, then process, then output, right? So that still applies in terms of writing a function, because you are going to pass in something to this function in general, right? Sometimes you're not, but let's just say for 90% of the time that you write a function, you will be passing in something. So you would have to define a parameter list. Okay? And then the computation part is going to be called the body of the function. So if you've noticed, when you create your C++ program, you have a compound statement within there. That's the body of the function. So you've already written a body of a function. You just kind of didn't know it yet. A little bit blind to what's actually been happening with this. Okay. Now, extra points if you remember what parameters are put in when you're creating this on Replit. Extra points. If you don't remember, it's okay. So on Replit, you have something called argc, right? Which is, I believe it's an int, and then argv, which is a char pointer, I believe. Okay, we're gonna learn about these in these lectures. So hang tight. Don't worry about it. But these parameters will come into your main, and they do have some functionality, some use to them, which you'll realize later in this whole string of lectures. Okay. Okay, so that is basically your parts of a function. And what we call this is the function header. Okay, this is a function header. All right. All right, on the next video, we will write our first function, and I will show you how that works on the actual compiler. See you on the next video.